The shadow of the forgotten, a priest's war against darkness. In the shadowed halls of a forgotten medieval castle where history bleeds into legend, a lone priest wages a desperate war against the darkest forces humanity has ever faced. Father Aldrich, burdened with faith and haunted by secrets, ventures into the heart of evil, a realm where demons roam, ancient curses fester, and the thin veil between the living and the dead shatters. Journey through a chilling saga of exorcism, betrayal, and supernatural horrors set against the backdrop of war-torn Europe. Each step draws Father Aldrich closer to a truth more terrifying than the demons he hunts, a truth that could unravel the very fabric of his soul and the world itself. Will faith be enough to conquer the shadows, or will darkness consume all? Prepare to enter a world where every whisper carries a curse, every shadow hides a secret, and no soul is safe. The fog was thick as milk when Father Aldrich arrived at St. Bertrand's Abbey, a forgotten monastery tucked in the folds of the French Pyrenees. The year was 1349, and the Black Death had just begun its slow crawl across the continent. Villages burned their dead, and priests either fled or died where they prayed. But St. Bertrand's Abbey had sent word. Something darker than plague stirred within their stone walls. Aldrich's horse refused to enter the monastery gate. He dismounted, whispering a prayer beneath his breath as he stepped through the archway. The iron gate creaked shut behind him, without a soul in sight. The courtyard was empty, save for the wind that carried faint chanting from somewhere within the cloister. Inside, the walls were lined with tapestry stained from time and something else, something black, sticky, and unholy. The air smelled of rot and incense, a sickening mixture that clung to Aldrich's robe. He found the prior of the abbey, Father Lucian, in the refectory. The man's eyes were wide and rimmed red, as though he hadn't slept in weeks. "You came," Lucian rasped. "God has mercy." "Tell me everything," Aldrich said, setting down his leather satchel. "From the beginning." Lucian's hands trembled. "It began when Brother Henri died. He was the first to fall ill. We thought it was the plague, but he whispered to us. Even after his last breath, we heard him. He begged. He warned." Aldrich frowned. "Warned of what?" "The choir sings at night," Lucian murmured, "but no one is in the chapel." Aldrich didn't speak. He simply stood and headed toward the chapel, lantern in hand. The abbey grew colder with every step. In the dim flicker of flame, shadows danced like marionettes across the ancient stone walls. Then the singing began. A cold, harmonious chant filled the hallways. Latin verses, perfectly sung, echoing from the direction of the chapel. But when Aldrich opened the door, the pews were empty. Only the crucifix stood above the altar, but the figure of Christ wept blood down his wooden cheeks. A whisper brushed his ear. "He is not here." Aldrich spun around, but no one stood behind him. He turned back to the crucifix, and the figure of Christ was gone. That night, Aldrich did not sleep. He kept vigil in the chapel, reading from the Book of Solomon. At the stroke of midnight, the bells tolled without being touched. A low moan echoed through the abbey, and shadows spilled like ink from the corners of the room. And then he saw them. The monks, dozens of them, walking slowly down the nave, their faces pale and hollow, eyes black as coal. They chanted with rotted tongues, robes dragging in silence. Brother Henri was among them, skin mottled and gray, mouth stitched shut with thorns. One by one they passed Aldrich, and none looked at him, except for the last one. He had no face, only a blank slab of skin where features should be. And yet Aldrich felt the thing was smiling. The faceless monk paused, lifted a hand, and pointed. 7 gates must remain sealed, it said without a mouth. You've opened one. The vision vanished. Morning light poured through the chapel windows, and Aldrich found himself alone again. Only his Bible remained open on his lap, stained with blood that wasn't his. The morning sun could not warm the chill Father Aldrich felt in his bones. The chapel, though bathed in light, seemed even more forsaken than the night before. The blood on his Bible had dried into dark, flaking stains. He wrapped it in cloth and slipped it back into his satchel. He found Father Lucian in the crypt, kneeling before a broken statue of St. Michael, his voice hoarse with prayer. "What happened last night," Aldrich said, "is not of this world." Lucian looked up, his hands still clasped. "You saw them too?" "I saw the dead walk," Aldrich said, "but something worse led them." Lucian stood slowly. "The faceless one. It appears to us in dreams. Some monks fled after seeing it. The others? They disappeared." Aldrich studied the cracked tiles beneath their feet. "You said Brother Henri died first. Where was he buried?" Lucian hesitated. "Not buried. He was interred in the lower vault. There was a tradition, centuries old. Important monks are sealed beneath the abbey." "Show me." They descended a narrow staircase carved into the rock. The walls grew damp, the air heavy with the scent of mold and iron. At the base was a massive wooden door, bound in rusted iron. Strange symbols had been etched into the surface. Old, not Latin, older. "These weren't carved by us," Lucian whispered. Aldrich traced one of the sigils with his finger. It burned cold. "This is pre-Christian," he murmured. "A ward, a seal." Lucian unlocked the door with a heavy iron key. The hinges groaned like a dying man. Inside was a circular chamber, and in its center, a stone sarcophagus. Candles flickered in the corners, though no one had been down in days. Brother Henri's name was carved into the stone, along with a date, 1349. Aldrich approached cautiously. "Did you hear the chanting begin after he was placed here?" Lucian nodded. Then something woke with him. As Aldrich knelt beside the sarcophagus, a sudden gust blew out every candle at once. In the darkness, a scratching began, inside the stone tomb. A hand slammed against the underside of the lid from within. Lucian screamed. "Stand back!" Aldrich shouted, pulling a flask of holy water from his belt. He sprinkled the stone as it rattled beneath his touch. A voice echoed from inside, low, guttural, unnatural. "You have opened the second gate." The stone lid cracked. Aldrich pressed his crucifix against the opening, chanting a Latin prayer. A blinding white light erupted, hurling both men backward. When Aldrich awoke, the lid was sealed once more, no sign of movement. But the sigils on the door had burned away, leaving only scorched wood. Lucian groaned beside him. "What is happening?" "The gates," Aldrich whispered. "They were sealed for a reason." That night, Aldrich wrote in his journal, 7 gates to hold back what once ruled this earth. One lies beneath this abbey. The dead are restless. I fear this war is older than mankind itself." 3 days had passed since the incident in the vault. The monks now avoided the lower halls, whispering prayers and crossing themselves every time Father Aldrich walked by. The abbey's great bell tower, once a beacon to the surrounding hills, stood eerily silent. "Why don't the bells ring anymore?" Aldrich asked Father Lucian one afternoon, as they stood in the courtyard under the gray sky. Lucian looked toward the tower. "They stopped the day Henri died. No wind, no sound. Even when we pulled the ropes ourselves, they stayed silent." "A curse," Aldrich muttered. Lucian hesitated. "There is something you should see." He led Aldrich through the cloisters and up a spiral staircase hidden behind a carved wall of saints. At the top, they entered the belfry. The bells were still there, massive bronze shapes hanging lifelessly as if petrified. Their surfaces were covered in strange ash-like soot, and upon closer inspection, black handprints smeared across the metal. Not human handprints, elongated, clawed. Aldrich's fingers brushed the largest bell. A chill ran through his body. His breath fogged in the air. The world seemed to slow. Then the bell groaned. Not from the wind, from within. Lucian stepped back, pale. You see it too. The sound was more than noise. It was a voice, buried in the metal, whispering in tongues lost to time. Aldrich felt blood drip from his ears. These bells are no longer ours, he whispered. Something sleeps inside them. Suddenly, the ground shook. The bell gave a low hum, vibrating in its cradle. Aldrich grabbed Lucian and pulled him back down the tower. As they descended, a piercing scream rose from the direction of the chapel. They ran. Inside, Brother Emile was kneeling before the altar, his body bent backward at an unnatural angle. His mouth stretched wider than should be possible, and from it poured a black mist. His eyes rolled back in his skull. Aldrich shouted a prayer and flung holy water toward him. The mist hissed like steam meeting flame, recoiling. Emile fell limp, but as the mist receded, it seemed to laugh. That night, Aldrich wrote, "Something ancient has poisoned this holy place. The dead do not rest. The bells once meant to call God's children now echo with the voices of the damned. I must discover who built the vault beneath this abbey and why it was buried." And in the distance, as the night grew still, one of the bells tolled, though no one had touched the rope. The morning after the bell tolled, Father Aldrich could no longer ignore the pattern. Every spiritual disturbance tied to the abbey seemed to originate from beneath the ground and somehow the bell tower. He returned to the archives, demanding access to the sealed blueprints of the monastery. Brother Mathieu, the librarian, hesitated. "These scrolls are forbidden. Even the abbot has never unsealed them." "Then let me be the first," Aldrich said, voice calm but firm. "God commands us to uncover darkness, not shield it." Mathieu reluctantly handed over a bundle wrapped in oilcloth. Inside were brittle parchments inked with faded symbols, construction diagrams, and notes scribbled in Latin. The original architect was named Isambard du Velay, a Frenchman hired in 1239. His designs were ornate, but one sketch caught Aldrich's eye. It showed a hidden chamber beneath the bell tower, deeper even than the vault they'd already discovered. Worse yet, written in the margins. "This chamber was not my design. The monks insisted. Paid hands built it by night. They called it Advincula Infernus, the chains of hell." That night, with only a torch and a worn crucifix, Aldrich returned to the base of the bell tower. He searched the stones for signs, anything. Then he saw it. A faint cross, chiseled into the corner beneath the floorboards. He pried them loose. Below, a stone stairwell spiraled into the earth. The deeper he went, the colder it became. His torch flickered. Shadows clung to the walls like living things. At the bottom, he found a circular chamber sealed with rusted chains. In the center, an iron door, carved with sigils of exorcism and warnings in dead languages. But even as he stood before it, something on the other side knocked. Aldrich stepped back, whispering prayers. The air thickened. Behind him, chains rattled. He turned, no one there. But the door began to bleed. Yes, bleed. A dark red liquid seeped from the carvings, forming Latin words. "We never left, we only waited." Aldrich stumbled back up the stairs, heart racing, chased by the sound of slow, heavy footsteps rising from the pit below. When he returned to his chamber, he found a note on his bed, one he hadn't written, a single line. The architect tried to stop them. They buried him alive. The following day, Father Aldrich did not speak a word during morning prayers. He had barely slept, haunted by the knocking and the bleeding door. The note on his bed, mentioning the architect, kept echoing in his mind. Who buried Isambard? Why? And what was chained in that subterranean chamber? He needed answers. He visited the ancient cemetery behind the monastery. Most of the tombstones were eroded beyond legibility, but Aldrich carried with him a faded list of names found in the archive. Near a crumbled wall, he found it. Isambard du Velay, architect, E+, 1240. The stone was simple, unmarked by symbols or blessings. odd for a man who'd built the house of God. He knelt and pressed his hand against the grave. The earth felt warm. That night, Aldrich returned with a lantern and a shovel. The soil was strangely soft. Barely 3 feet down, the metal edge of the shovel struck wood. A coffin. But something was wrong. It was too small. When he opened it, his breath caught. There was no body, just bricks. Dozens of red bricks, each engraved. He lifted one. It was heavier than it should be. The surface bore tiny Latin inscriptions. One word over and over. Oris? Ear? Confused, he touched it to his ear and heard a whisper. Still here, buried. Chains, not dead. Aldrich staggered back, dropping the brick. He opened more of the coffin. All bricks. Some hissed when touched. One screamed. He gathered a few into his satchel and rushed to the sanctuary. Under candlelight, he laid them on the altar and examined their engravings. Each told a fragment of a story. Names of monks, unknown rites, a forgotten exorcism, and drawings of something bound by chains and thorns. He understood then. Isambard did not die. He was sealed. His soul fragmented, trapped inside these bricks, used to build the cursed chamber below. Aldrich prayed fervently, and the bricks moved. One slid from the altar and cracked on the floor, releasing a chilling, disembodied voice. He begged them to stop. They needed a sacrifice. They chose him. The other bricks began to tremble. Then a gust of wind blew through the sanctuary, extinguishing all candles, except one. The flame flickered violently, casting shadows on the walls, and in the shadow a figure stood, thin, broken, wrapped in chains. He waits below, it rasped, and the door is waking. The figure of Isambard vanished as quickly as it came, swallowed by the shadows. Father Aldrich stood alone in the sanctuary, the single candle now burning low. The whispering bricks lay silent on the altar, but he could feel their presence buzzing like a swarm in his soul. Suddenly, the great bell above the abbey tolled. Once, then again. Aldrich froze. It was midnight. The bell tower was sealed and no one had access. No monk was allowed to ring it outside of holy festivals. And yet it rang, as if summoned by something older than man. He rushed outside into the cold night. The sky was thick with clouds, yet the moon pierced through them like a silver blade. The bell rang a third time, its echo bouncing through the forest like a warning. Then silence. He ascended the creaking spiral stairs to the belfry. The trapdoor was locked. He took out the iron key passed down through generations of abbots and turned it. The door groaned open. Inside, it smelled of wet stone and old blood. The bell rope swung gently, though no wind blew. Aldrich shone his lantern upward. The great bell, cast in 1127, glimmered with moisture. Below it, etched into the wood, was a Latin phrase that hadn't been there before. Non pulsatur manu, not rung by hand. He turned, uneasy, and found footprints in the dust. Bare feet, small like those of a child. They led to the wall and simply stopped. Suddenly, the bell rope snapped upright, as if pulled from above, and the bell rang a fourth time, the loudest yet. Aldrich fell to his knees, his head spinning from the sound. Something howled in the distance. It was not a wolf. He staggered down the tower, the echoes of the bell following him like footsteps. When he reached the sanctuary again, he found the bricks missing. Only one was left, broken in two. Scratched into its surface in blood were the words, "Too late, the door's open." His hands trembled. He rushed to the crypt and descended the steps. The iron door was ajar, and there, upon the stone floor, were wet footprints leading into the darkness. The crypt had always been a place of silence. Built beneath a central altar in the 9th century, its stone corridors extended like the roots of a dead tree beneath the abbey. No monk had ventured into its deeper chambers for generations, not since the Black Plague, when the dead were entombed there in desperate haste. Father Aldrich descended the stairway. lantern in hand. The air thickened with every step, turning from damp to rotten, from cold to something that breathed back at him. The wet footprints, small and childlike, shimmered ahead of him on the mossy stone. The silence was deceptive. There was sound, but not of this world. Whispers slithered through the stones, syllables without language. Behind him, he could hear faint echoes, footsteps that did not match his own. Then he saw it. The great iron door, long rusted shut, now wide open. Beyond it, the crypt widened into a chamber carved directly from the bedrock. A broken altar stood at its center, and on it, a small white tunic stained with age, neatly folded. Around it, dozens of mummified hands stretched from the walls, their fingers broken as if clawing to escape. Above the altar, etched in soot on the stone, was a crude drawing. A child, eyes hollow, standing beneath a tree with no leaves. Above the child's head floated a black shape, crowned with antlers. Aldrich's breath caught. Then behind him, a giggle. He turned sharply, lantern raised. No one. Only the tunnel, empty as before. Then another sound. Scratching, not on the wall, from inside the wall. Suddenly the floor beneath the altar cracked. Stone shifted. Something below was moving. Aldrich stepped forward and saw the floor sagging, as though something beneath was pressing upward. He began to recite a prayer in Latin, voice trembling. In nomine Patris et Filii et Spiritus Sancti. The stone split. Dust filled the room. And then a hand reached up, small, gray, thin as parchment. Another followed, then a face, childlike, ageless, hollow-eyed. It looked at Aldrich and smiled, not with malice, with recognition, and then it spoke in a voice dry as old leaves. You're the last one. The ground collapsed. Aldrich stumbled back, his lantern falling and shattering. Darkness rushed in. From the hole, dozens of pale hands began to climb, pulling small ancient bodies from below. And as Aldrich fled back into the corridor, heart pounding, he heard the voice again. You broke the seal. The air in the corridor was thick with dust and dread as Father Aldrich fled from the crypt, the chilling words echoing in his mind. You broke the seal. His lantern shattered on the cold stone floor, plunging him into near darkness, save for the pale moonlight filtering faintly through a narrow window above. His heart pounded not only from the narrow escape, but from the terrible certainty settling like a frost. The children in the crypt were no ordinary spirits. They were the forgotten, souls trapped in a purgatory born of dark rituals centuries ago. Back in the Abbey's small study, Aldrich opened a tattered tome. Its pages detailed a cursed event from the late 1300s. A plague outbreak had devastated the village surrounding the abbey, and in desperation, the monks had performed forbidden rites to contain the spreading death. But the rituals went awry, binding the spirits of the innocent children to the crypt beneath the altar. The book's ink had faded, but one phrase was etched in blood-red letters. The innocent, chained by sacrilege, shall rise to claim what was stolen. As Aldrich read, a whisper curled through the room, soft but insistent, like breath against the nape of his neck. Free us. He spun around, candle flickering wildly. Nothing. Yet the air grew heavier, and in the shadows shapes stirred. Ghostly outlines of children, their faces pale and eyes pleading. Aldrich knew the abbey was no longer a sanctuary. It was a prison of sorrow and secrets, and he was the last hope to release those bound souls, without unleashing a darkness far worse. The morning sun cast long shadows across the ancient stones of the abbey, as Father Aldrich gathered his courage and descended once more into the crypt's depths. The lingering whispers haunted him still, but his resolve was steel. He had to understand the nature of the curse that bound the children's souls. Within the cold, damp walls, Aldrich found a hidden chamber, sealed by an ancient symbol burned into the wood of the door, a pentagram entwined with a broken cross. The mark was unmistakable, the sigil of a fallen angel. He recalled the old legends, a once angelic being, cast from heaven for pride and rebellion, whose shadow tainted the earth with despair. It was said that those touched by this darkness bore a mark, a symbol that cursed their soul for eternity. Aldrich traced the symbol with trembling fingers, then pulled a small silver knife from his cloak. Carefully, he cut away a piece of the door to take with him, hoping to study it in the Abbey's archives. As he worked, a cold wind swept through the chamber, and a voice like grinding stone echoed from the darkness. "You seek the mark, priest, but it marks you too." The temperature dropped sharply, and Aldrich felt an unseen presence pressing close, suffocating. His candle flickered out, leaving him alone in pitch black. Grasping his crucifix, he whispered a prayer, feeling the weight of a destiny far greater than the simple hunt for ghosts. This was a war for souls, and the fallen angel's shadow had only just begun to spread. Days passed, but Father Aldrich's thoughts never left the cursed chamber. The stolen fragment of the door lay on his desk, cold and heavy with unspoken malice. In the Abbey's dim archives, he pored over scrolls and manuscripts, seeking any mention of the fallen angel's mark. An ancient parchment revealed a horrifying truth. Centuries ago, the Abbey had been built atop the ruins of a pagan temple dedicated to a dark deity, long forgotten by history. The monks' forbidden rites had inadvertently awakened the deity's wrath, binding the innocent children's souls as a grim sacrifice to contain its power. As Aldrich traced the faded ink, distant echoes reached his ears. Soft chanting carried on the wind, seeming to seep from the very stones beneath the Abbey. With mounting dread, he realized the crypt was not just a prison for lost souls. It was a gateway. That night, determined to confront the growing darkness, Aldrich returned to the crypt. Lantern in hand, he descended the steps as the chanting grew louder, a chorus of ghostly voices rising from the depths. Suddenly, the ground trembled beneath his feet, dust falling like cold rain. From the shadows emerged a figure, cloaked in darkness, eyes burning with unholy fire. "You cannot escape the past, priest," it hissed. "The mark has chosen you." Aldrich steadied his breath. The battle for the souls trapped beneath the stone was far from over, and the true nightmare had only just begun. Father Aldrich stood frozen as the shadowy figure's fiery eyes bore into his soul. The air thickened, heavy with centuries of sin and suffering. The creature's voice was a venomous whisper, promising ruin and despair. "You think you can sever the ties of the past? The curse runs through your blood now, priest. The mark is not just a symbol, it is a destiny." Aldrich's hand gripped his crucifix tighter, its silver gleaming faintly in the darkness. Summoning every ounce of faith, he recited the ancient exorcism rites, the Latin words flowing like a lifeline against the encroaching darkness. The figure recoiled, a tortured howl tearing through the crypt's stillness. Shadows writhed and twisted around Aldrich, but he stood firm, the cross a beacon of light in the abyss. As the final prayer left his lips, the dark apparition vanished with a scream that echoed like thunder. The crypt fell silent, save for Aldrich's ragged breaths. Yet the priest knew this was only a reprieve. The veil between worlds had thinned, and the war for souls had drawn even closer to his heart. The fallen angel's mark burned not just on the door, but now within him, a scar of eternal struggle. He must prepare, for the darkness was far from defeated. The first light of dawn crept through the stained glass windows, casting fractured colors onto the cold stone floor of the Abbey's chapel. Father Aldrich sat in quiet prayer, exhaustion weighing on his shoulders, but resolve burning bright. The mark on his palm throbbed with a faint heat, a constant reminder of the darkness he now carried within. But the priest knew he could not falter, not when the fate of countless souls hung in the balance. A sudden chill swept through the chapel as the flickering candle flames danced wildly. Aldrich's eyes darted to the altar, where shadows seemed to gather, coalescing into faint, whispering shapes. "Help us," the voices breathed, fragile and broken, echoing from beyond the veil. Aldrich rose slowly, his heart pounding. These were the trapped souls calling out for salvation, their voices caught between worlds. The chapel, once a sanctuary, had become a liminal space, a threshold where the living and the dead intertwined. Determined to bring peace, Aldrich opened his ancient prayer book and began to chant a prayer of deliverance. The whispers grew louder, rising into a sorrowful wail that shook the very stones beneath his feet. But as the final verse ended, the chapel fell silent once more, except for a single, chilling whisper that lingered in the air. "Beware the shadows beneath." The warning echoed relentlessly in Father Aldrich's mind as he prepared to descend once more into the crypt beneath the abbey. The whispers, eerie and urgent, had stirred a fire within him, one that demanded he confront the source of the darkness directly. With a heavy lantern and worn Bible in hand, he opened the heavy iron door leading to the underground tomb. The air was thick with dampness and decay, and the scent of old earth filled his lungs. Shadows flickered on the walls, dancing in rhythm with his quickened heartbeat. The crypt was vast, an intricate maze of stone corridors lined with ancient tombs, many long forgotten. As Aldrich ventured deeper, the whispers grew clearer, forming fragmented prayers and mournful pleas. Suddenly, a cold breeze swept through the narrow passage, extinguishing his lantern. Plunged into darkness, Aldrich felt the weight of unseen eyes upon him. The ground beneath trembled slightly as distant footsteps echoed, a slow, deliberate pace that sent chills down his spine. In the gloom, a faint glow appeared ahead, illuminating a weathered sarcophagus carved with arcane symbols. The whispers intensified, urging him closer. With trembling hands, Aldrich reached out, his fingers brushing against the stone lid. A surge of icy energy shot through him, and the crypt seemed to come alive with restless spirits, waiting, watching, and ready to reveal secrets long buried. The crypt's cold breath lingered as Father Aldrich wrestled with the visions flooding his mind. The weight of centuries pressed down on him, thick with the anguish of those long departed. He could still hear their whispers, half prayers, half curses, entwined with the faint scent of blood and rot. Aldrich's fingers trembled, tracing the ancient symbols etched into the sarcophagus's stone lid. Each curve and line told a story of torment and betrayal, a dark history buried beneath layers of dust and time. This was no ordinary tomb. It was a prison for something far older, something darker than any he had ever faced. The priest steeled himself and pushed open the heavy lid. A foul gust of stale air escaped, carrying the faintest echo of a scream. Inside, the coffin was empty, save for a small blood-stained parchment sealed with a crimson wax emblem. He unfolded it carefully. The parchment bore a detailed map of the abbey's underground passages, secret chambers and forgotten tunnels that even the monks had long ceased to speak of. At the center, a large red X marked a hidden chamber, ominously labeled the Chamber of the Forsaken. Aldrich's heart pounded. The chamber must hold the answers he sought, the origin of the curse, and perhaps the key to banishing the darkness once and for all. With renewed purpose, he pocketed the map and relit his lantern. The crypt felt alive now, shadows shifting and whispering in anticipation. Every step deeper into the labyrinth seemed to echo with the ghosts of the past, their cries a constant reminder of the stakes at hand. The journey was perilous. Narrow tunnels crumbled beneath his feet, and ancient traps, long forgotten, lay in wait to ensnare the unwary. But Aldrich moved forward, guided by faith in the faint glow of the map's markings. Hours passed. The air grew colder, heavier. The silence pressed in on him like a suffocating shroud. Then at last, he arrived at a vast iron door, covered in rust and strange runes. The red X on the map was here. He rested his hand on the door, feeling a pulse beneath the metal, as if something alive and malignant stirred beyond. Taking a deep breath, Aldrich began to pray, invoking protection and strength. The runes glowed faintly and the heavy door creaked open. Beyond was a chamber filled with shadows, writhing forms that seemed to breathe, to pulse with dark energy. At its center, an altar stained with dried blood and ancient relics. And there, chained to the wall, a figure slumped, worn and broken, but unmistakably human. As Aldrich stepped closer, the figure lifted its head. Hollow eyes met his own, filled with a mixture of torment and hope. "Welcome, Father," the voice rasped. "I have waited centuries for someone to free me, but beware. The darkness you seek to destroy is bound to me." The priest nodded, heart heavy but determined. The true battle was only beginning. Father Aldrich stood motionless, the weight of the forsaken man's words sinking deep into his soul. The flickering lantern cast long shadows across the chamber walls, making the darkness seem alive, thick, with unseen eyes watching, waiting. "I am called Matthias," the chained figure whispered, voice rough from centuries of imprisonment. "Long ago, I was a knight sworn to protect this land, but greed and betrayal led me to a curse worse than death." Aldrich lowered his lantern, focusing on Matthias's hollow eyes. "Tell me everything," he urged. "No detail is too small if it helps lift this darkness." Matthias nodded slowly. "It began during the last great war, the war that tore kingdoms apart and stained the soil with blood. I was sent to guard the borderlands where enemies lurked like shadows, waiting to devour us whole." He paused, a shudder crossing his gaunt frame. "One night, a stranger arrived at our camp. He spoke of dark powers, forbidden knowledge that could turn the tide of war. Many of my comrades dismissed him as a madman, but I listened." Father Aldrich felt a chill. "What did you do?" "I accepted his offer," Matthias said, voice heavy with regret. "I sought power to protect my people, but the price was far higher than I imagined. The stranger was a servant of the abyss, a demon cloaked in human skin. He cursed me, binding my soul to this tomb." The priest's heart clenched. "Is there a way to break the curse?" Matthias's eyes glistened with a faint hope. "There is a ritual, but it requires great sacrifice. The blood of the innocent, the light of the pure, and the faith of a true servant of God." Aldrich's mind raced. He knew the dangers. Any misstep could doom them both. But the fate of the Abbey, perhaps even the world beyond, rested on this moment. "Guide me," he said solemnly. "Together we will end this nightmare." As Matthias began to chant in a language long forgotten, the chamber trembled. Shadows writhed and twisted, as if the darkness itself fought against the light trying to break through. Aldrich held fast to his faith, praying for strength. The air thickened, time seeming to slow as the ancient ritual unfolded. Suddenly a blinding flash erupted, filling the chamber with searing light. When it faded, Matthias lay still, the chains shattered and the darkness lifting like a dissipating storm. But the silence that followed was uneasy. Somewhere deep within the Abbey, a new darkness stirred, one that would challenge Aldrich's resolve and faith like never before. The true battle for the soul of the land was only beginning. The silence that followed the ritual was heavy, thick with anticipation and an unspoken dread. Father Aldrich carefully extinguished his lantern, the sudden darkness settling like a suffocating blanket over the chamber. Matthias's broken chains lay cold on the stone floor, but the man himself was no longer the pitiful figure of before. His eyes burned with a strange fire, one part relief, one part warning. "We have but won a brief reprieve," Matthias said softly. "The curse is lifted from my soul, but the darkness has only shifted. It seeks a new host, and this abbey, it calls to it like a beacon." Aldrich's gaze swept the ancient walls, their cold stones seeming to pulse with unseen life. The abbey was old, older than any living memory, built upon the ruins of forgotten sins and old battles that stained its foundations. "Then we must prepare," Aldrich replied. "If the darkness returns, we will be ready." For the next days, the abbey was a hive of whispered prayers and hurried preparations. Aldrich scoured ancient texts, seeking forgotten rites and protective wards. The monks lit candles in every corner, their flickering flames a fragile barrier against the encroaching night. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, a chill swept through the cloisters. The wind carried a faint, mournful melody, like a lament from the past. Aldrich followed the sound to the chapel, where the stained glass windows caught the dying light, casting fractured colors on the cold floor. There, in the shadows, a figure stood, tall, cloaked in black, with eyes as hollow as the grave. Aldrich's heart clenched. He recognized the silhouette instantly. It was the one they called the Harbinger. "You should not have disturbed the balance," the figure whispered, voice like the rustling of dead leaves. Aldrich stepped forward, clutching his crucifix. "This abbey stands under God's protection. You have no power here." The Harbinger laughed, a sound like cracking ice. "Power is a fleeting thing, Father. Darkness thrives in the cracks you cannot see. Soon this place will be consumed." As the figure vanished into the night, Aldrich felt the weight of the coming storm. The true test was only beginning, and the fate of the abbey, and perhaps the entire realm, rested on his shoulders. The days following the Harbinger's visit were fraught with an uneasy tension. Father Aldrich could feel the shadows lengthening within the abbey's ancient halls, as if the very stones whispered warnings in a language lost to time. His nights became restless, haunted by dreams of flickering candles and faces twisted in torment. One morning, as the pale dawn seeped through the stained glass, Aldrich found a note slipped beneath his door. The parchment was old, the ink faded but legible. "Seek the crypt beneath the altar. There lies the truth that binds the curse." Without hesitation, Aldrich donned his cloak and descended into the cold, damp crypt below the chapel. The air was thick with the scent of earth and decay. Torches flickered along the walls, revealing carvings that told stories of nights, betrayals, and battles long past. In the center of the crypt stood an ancient sarcophagus, its surface carved with the image of a weeping woman. As Aldrich traced the inscriptions, a chill ran down his spine. The story was one of love and loss, a noble woman accused of witchcraft, condemned to die, her spirit trapped in a curse that had festered through centuries. The abbey, built over her resting place, had become a beacon for restless souls. The Harbinger's arrival was no accident. It was a summons by the darkness itself. Aldrich's heart weighed heavy with the burden of this revelation. To break the curse, he would need to find the noble woman's remains and perform the rite of absolution. But first he had to confront the shadows that lurked within the walls and the darkness that was spreading beyond. As he ascended from the crypt, the first light of morning cast long shadows across the abbey grounds. The battle for the soul of the ancient fortress was just beginning. Father Aldrich returned to his chambers, with the weight of the crypt's revelation heavy on his mind. The story of the noble woman, Lady Isolde, was a thread that tied the abbey's dark history to the present evil. He knew that to break the curse he must first understand the life she had led and the reasons behind her tragic fate. That evening, Aldrich pored over dusty manuscripts in the Abbey's library. The flickering candlelight cast long shadows over the rows of ancient tomes. He uncovered a faded journal, written in elegant script, that belonged to a knight named Sir Rowland, the only man who had dared to defend Lady Isolde. According to the journal, Lady Isolde was a woman of remarkable beauty and intelligence, beloved by many, but feared by those who sought power. Accused of witchcraft, after a bitter betrayal, she was sentenced to death by the very court that should have protected her. Sir Rowland's entries detailed his desperate attempts to save her, including secret meetings and forbidden prayers. But the forces aligned against her were too strong. In the end, she was dragged to the Abbey's crypt, left to die alone in the darkness. Aldrich realized the curse was born from injustice and pain, a wound left open through centuries. To bring peace to Lady Isolde's restless spirit, he would need to perform a rite of forgiveness, but it required her remains, still hidden somewhere beneath the Abbey. Determined, Aldrich prepared to search deeper into the shadows of the Abbey. The night outside was thick with fog, and distant howls echoed through the valley, a grim reminder that the darkness was far from gone. The next night, cloaked in darkness, Father Aldrich ventured deeper into the Abbey's hidden passages. The flicker of his lantern cast eerie shadows on ancient stone walls covered in creeping ivy and faded frescoes. Each step echoed through the narrow corridors, a reminder that this place had borne witness to centuries of secrets and sorrow. Guided by the inscriptions he had found in the crypt, Aldrich sought the fabled Forbidden Chamber, a room said to house Lady Isolde's remains and the key to breaking the curse. Legends told that the chamber was sealed by ancient wards, protected by both divine and profane forces. As he reached the heavy oak door, he noticed strange symbols carved around its frame, glowing faintly in the lantern light. Taking a deep breath, Aldrich recited a prayer taught to him by an old monk, one said to weaken dark enchantments. With a creak, the door slowly opened, revealing a small chamber lined with dusty relics and shattered stained glass. At its center lay an ornately carved coffin, bound with iron clasps etched with mysterious runes. Aldrich's fingers trembled as he brushed away the dust from the coffin's lid. He could almost hear a whisper, a plea for release from a soul trapped too long in torment. Suddenly, a cold wind blew through the chamber, extinguishing his lantern and plunging him into darkness. Heart pounding, Aldrich lit a candle, the flickering flame revealing a figure standing in the shadows, a specter of Lady Isolde, her eyes filled with sorrow and warning. "You seek to free me," she whispered, voice like the rustling of dead leaves. "But beware, the curse is stronger than your faith." Aldrich nodded solemnly, gripping his crucifix tighter. "I will not falter. Your suffering will end." The specter's form dissolved into the darkness, leaving behind an icy chill. Aldrich knew the real battle was just beginning, against forces older and darker than he had ever imagined. As Father Aldrich left the forbidden chamber, an unsettling silence filled the Abbey's ancient halls. The air seemed heavier, thick with an unseen presence that clawed at the edges of his soul. The specter's warning echoed in his mind. The curse was stronger than his faith. He hurried back to his quarters, clutching the iron-bound journal of Sir Rowland and the prayers scrawled in fading ink. He knew the time for caution had passed. He needed to confront the darkness directly. That night, Aldrich prepared the ritual of light, a sacred rite meant to cleanse evil spirits. Candles were arranged in a circle around the crypt's entrance, their flames flickering against the cold stone. The scent of burning incense mingled with the dampness of the underground tomb. As he began to chant, a low growl resonated from the shadows. The ground trembled beneath his feet, and a chill wind swept through the chamber. From the darkness emerged a figure cloaked in black smoke, eyes glowing red with malice, the true form of the curse. Aldrich's voice did not waver. Holding up his crucifix, he recited prayers of exorcism, calling upon the saints and angels to banish the evil. The specter of Lady Isolde appeared once more, this time her face serene, her sorrow replaced by hope. The cursed entity shrieked in fury, swirling smoke and shadows battling the light. But the strength of Aldrich's faith was unyielding. Slowly the darkness began to dissolve, retreating into the cracks and crevices of the crypt. As dawn broke over the abbey, peace returned. The heavy weight that had oppressed the ancient stones lifted, and the air grew lighter, filled with the faint scent of lilies, the symbol of purity and redemption. Father Aldrich knew the battle was far from over. The curse had been weakened, but the scars of history remained. Yet, in the quiet morning light, he found a renewed resolve to protect the abbey, to guard its secrets, and to stand as a beacon of hope against the shadows that still lurked beyond. The morning sun cast long golden beams through the stained glass windows of the abbey's chapel, illuminating dust motes that danced in the air. Father Aldrich knelt in silent prayer, the weight of the past battles pressing heavily on his heart. The abbey, once a sanctuary of peace, had been scarred by war, its stones soaked with the blood of fallen soldiers and innocent villagers alike. Outside, the distant sound of bells told, a grim reminder that conflict still raged beyond these walls. The 100 Years' War had left Europe fragmented and trembling, and the abbey was no exception. Soldiers had taken refuge here, their armor tarnished and spirits broken, their faces haunted by horrors unseen. Aldrich's thoughts drifted to the ancient chronicles he had studied, tales of sieges, betrayals, and battles fought not only with swords, but with dark sorcery. It was said that the curse plaguing the abbey was born from a brutal conflict centuries ago, when alliances shattered and lives were sacrificed to appease vengeful spirits. As he prepared to leave for the village, a messenger arrived breathless, clutching a tattered letter stained with blood. The message was dire. A new wave of violence threatened the region, and the villagers sought Aldrich's guidance and protection. He gathered his sacred relics and stepped out into the chill morning air, determination hardening his resolve. The shadows of war were long, but the light of faith burned brighter. Aldrich knew he must face not only the demons of the past, but the terrors still lurking in the present. With each step toward the village, the echoes of war grew louder, whispers of lost souls, cries of the wounded, and the ever-present specter of death. Yet amidst the darkness, Aldrich carried a flicker of hope, a promise to fight for redemption and peace. The village lay shrouded in mist as Father Aldrich approached, its narrow streets empty and silent. The war had left scars not only on the land, but in the hearts of its people. Windows were shuttered tight, and the once vibrant market square was deserted save for a few weary souls who glanced nervously from behind closed doors. Aldrich made his way to the chapel at the center of the village, where the villagers had gathered, their faces etched with fear and exhaustion. Mothers clutched children close, and elders whispered prayers under their breath. The weight of impending violence hung heavily in the air. He listened carefully as the village elder recounted recent horrors, raids by mercenaries, strange sightings in the nearby forest, and whispers of dark rituals conducted under the cover of night. It was clear that the curse haunting the abbey had spread its malevolence far beyond the stone walls. Determined to protect the village, Aldrich organized a night watch, training the able-bodied men to stand guard with torches and makeshift weapons. He also sought out the oldest families, hoping to uncover forgotten knowledge that might aid in combating the growing darkness. That evening, as shadows deepened, Aldrich stood at the chapel's altar, invoking prayers for protection and strength. Outside, the wind howled like a beast, and distant screams pierced the night. The battle was no longer confined to ancient crypts. It had come to the very doorstep of the villagers. Yet, amidst the fear and uncertainty, Aldrich's faith remained a steadfast beacon. He vowed to stand between the people and the encroaching darkness, to fight not only with sword and prayer, but with unyielding hope. As dawn broke, Father Aldrich ventured toward the edge of the village where the dense forest, known locally as the Whispering Woods, loomed like a dark sentinel. The villagers spoke in hushed tones of the woods, warning that evil dwelled within, shadows that moved with a life of their own, and voices that lured travelers into the depths, never to return. Determined to uncover the truth, Aldrich carried his crucifix and a small vial of holy water, stepping cautiously beneath the twisted branches. The air grew colder, thick with an unnatural silence that pressed on his senses. Leaves rustled faintly, as if whispering secrets meant only for the trees. Suddenly, a chilling voice echoed, a soft, sorrowful lament that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere. Aldrich's heart pounded as the whispers grew louder, forming words in a language long forgotten. He called upon his faith, reciting prayers to ward off the darkness that sought to consume him. Deeper into the woods, he found signs of a ritual: charred earth, strange symbols etched into bark, and the remnants of candles melted into blackened pools. It was a place of power, corrupted by forces older and darker than any mortal conflict. Aldrich knelt and sprinkled holy water on the ground, chanting solemnly. The air shifted, and for a moment the shadows recoiled. But as he rose, a figure emerged, a spectral woman with hollow eyes, her form flickering between this world and the next. She spoke in a voice both mournful and accusing, revealing a tragic story of betrayal and vengeance that had cursed the land for generations. Aldrich listened, knowing that to break the curse he would need to confront not only the evil in the woods, but the sins of the past. With renewed resolve, he prepared to face the darkness head on, aware that the path ahead was fraught with danger, but illuminated by the light of his unwavering faith. Father Aldrich's investigation led him back to the ancient castle that loomed over the valley, its towering spires silhouetted against the stormy sky. The castle had been abandoned for decades, but rumors whispered of a hidden chamber deep within its walls, one that held the key to the curse plaguing the land. Determined to uncover the truth, Aldrich climbed the winding stone staircase, each step echoing through the silent halls. The air was thick with dust and the scent of decay, and shadows danced grotesquely on the walls as lightning flashed outside. In a forgotten chamber beneath the great hall, Aldrich discovered a worn leather-bound journal, its pages yellowed with age. The journal belonged to a knight who had once served the castle, and its entries spoke of a terrible betrayal, a pact made with dark forces to secure victory in a long-forgotten war. The knight's words painted a grim picture of greed and desperation. He had called upon a demon, offering the souls of his comrades in exchange for power, but the demon's price was far greater than anyone had imagined, binding the castle and its inhabitants to an eternal curse. Aldrich's heart pounded as he read the final entry, a desperate plea for forgiveness and a warning to any who might find the journal. The knight begged that the curse be broken before it consumed them all. Armed with this knowledge, Aldrich knew his mission had grown even more urgent. The secrets of the castle were intertwined with the darkness spreading through the land, and only by confronting the past could he hope to save the future. Father Aldrich left the castle with the knight's journal tightly clutched in his hands. The weight of the knowledge pressed heavily on his shoulders. The darkness that gripped the land was no mere superstition. It was the manifestation of a sin buried deep within history. The knight's pact with a demon had unleashed a malevolent force that had lingered for centuries. As Aldrich walked back through the village, he noticed the fearful glances of the townspeople, their faces pale with dread. He could feel the invisible chains of the curse tightening, suffocating the once peaceful hamlet. His mission was clear: to sever those chains and free the souls trapped within. That night, in the flickering candlelight of his modest chamber, Aldrich pored over the journal's pages. The knight's words spoke of a ritual, a binding ceremony performed in the depths of the forest. If Aldrich could find the remnants of that ritual and reverse it, perhaps the curse could be broken. Determined, Aldrich set out at dawn for the Whispering Woods once more. This time, he was not alone. A small group of villagers, having heard of his plan, offered to accompany him, their faces a mixture of hope and fear. The forest seemed even more ominous under the morning sun. The trees whispered secrets as the group moved cautiously, following the faint traces of ancient markings that led deeper into the shadows. Hours passed until they reached a clearing where the earth was scorched and the air crackled with a strange energy. In the center lay a circle of stones, remnants of the binding ritual. Aldrich began the prayers, his voice steady despite the oppressive atmosphere. As the last words left his lips, a cold wind swept through the clearing. Shadows gathered, coalescing into a dark figure, an embodiment of the curse itself. The villagers gasped, but Aldrich stood firm, holding his crucifix high. A fierce battle of wills ensued, faith clashing against darkness. The figure writhed and screamed, but Aldrich's prayers held strong, the light pushing back the encroaching night. Finally, with a deafening roar, the shadow shattered, dissolving into the morning mist. The air grew lighter, and a calm settled over the woods. The curse had been broken, at least for now. As the villagers thanked him, Aldrich knew this victory was but a single step on a long and perilous journey. The past shadows might fade, but new darknesses always waited to rise. The village was quiet now, but Father Aldrich knew the peace was fragile. The curse might have been lifted from the forest clearing, but the darkness still lingered in other places, hidden, waiting. That evening, as the wind howled outside his small chamber, Aldrich sat by the fire, contemplating the next steps. The journal had revealed much, but many pages were still unreadable, written in a language lost to time. He realized he needed help, someone versed in ancient texts and occult knowledge. He sent a message to a scholar in a distant city, a man reputed for his knowledge of forbidden lore. The scholar's name was Matthias, and within days he arrived, a stern man with sharp eyes and an aura of mystery. Together, they pored over the journal by candlelight, deciphering cryptic passages and obscure symbols. Matthias spoke of a force beyond the demon's binding, a shadow that fed on fear and sorrow, growing stronger with every soul it claimed. The curse is not just a chain, Matthias said. It's a living darkness, a parasite that corrupts everything it touches. Their study was interrupted by a sudden chill. The flames flickered violently as a whisper seemed to rise from the walls, a faint voice calling Aldrich's name. The two men exchanged wary glances, aware that the evil they fought was far from finished. Determined to confront this new threat, Aldrich and Matthias planned a journey to the ruined abbey, where the darkness was said to have first taken hold. The abbey, once a place of worship, was now a desolate shell, shunned by all. As they prepared to leave at dawn, Aldrich felt the weight of history pressing down once more. The shadows whispered secrets of betrayal and sacrifice, and the line between friend and foe blurred, but there was no turning back. The battle for the soul of the land had only just begun. The journey to the ruined abbey was arduous. Father Aldrich and Matthias traversed dense forests and treacherous hills, the weight of their purpose heavy upon them. The villagers' warnings echoed in Aldrich's mind. Stories of madness and death surrounding the abbey had kept even the bravest away. As they neared the desolate structure, an unnatural silence fell over the land. Birds ceased their songs, and the wind seemed to hold its breath. The abbey loomed ahead, its shattered spires piercing the gray sky like jagged teeth. Stepping through the broken gates, Aldrich felt the oppressive darkness wrap around him like a shroud. The air was thick with decay and sorrow. Within the crumbling walls, shadows moved unnaturally, as if the very stones remembered the evil that had taken root. Matthias began his examination, tracing symbols etched into the walls and floor. This place was the epicenter of the curse, he murmured. A forbidden ritual performed here awakened a force no one could control. Suddenly, a chilling howl echoed through the ruins. The ground trembled beneath their feet as spectral figures materialized, tormented souls trapped between worlds, their anguished wails filling the night. Aldrich raised his crucifix, chanting prayers of protection. The spirits recoiled, but the presence of the dark force was undeniable. From the shadows emerged a towering figure cloaked in black, eyes glowing with malevolent fire. The battle began. Light clashed against darkness as Aldrich and Matthias fought not only for their lives, but for the fate of the village and the land itself. The abbey seemed alive, its walls groaning with ancient power, as the darkness sought to consume all. Hours later, exhausted and battered, Aldrich stood victorious but wary. The dark figure had vanished, but the echoes of evil remained. He knew this was only one battle in a war that stretched across centuries. As dawn broke, the ruined abbey seemed less menacing, but Father Aldrich's resolve hardened. He would continue his fight until every shadow was banished, and the land could breathe free once more. The sun had barely risen when Father Aldrich and Matthias returned to the village. The villagers gathered around, their faces pale and anxious, eager for news of the ruined abbey. Whispers of ghosts and curses had haunted their dreams for generations, and now those fears seemed all too real. Aldrich stood before them, his voice steady but grave. The darkness we fight is ancient and cunning. It feeds on our fears and thrives in the shadows, but it is not invincible. Matthias stepped forward, revealing a small weathered scroll. This contains a part of the abbey's secret, records of the betrayal that unleashed the curse. The villagers leaned in as Matthias unrolled the fragile parchment. The script spoke of a monk named Aemon, once a trusted servant of the abbey, who had turned against his brethren during the war. Driven by ambition and dark promises, Aemon had performed a forbidden ritual, calling forth the shadow that had since claimed countless lives. Aldrich's heart tightened. The betrayal was not just spiritual, but deeply personal, a wound that echoed through time. The abbey's fall had shattered the community, leaving behind pain and distrust. That night, Aldrich prayed for guidance. As the candle flickered, a vision came to him. Aemon's face twisted in torment, trapped between redemption and damnation. The shadow's power was linked to Aemon's soul, and only by confronting the source could the curse be undone. Matthias agreed to journey with Aldrich to the hidden crypt beneath the abbey, where Aemon's remains were said to rest. There, they hoped to find the final key to banishing the darkness. But the path was perilous. The crypt was guarded by ancient wards and restless spirits, remnants of the abbey's tragic past. As they prepared, the villagers offered what little they had: holy water, relics, and prayers, hoping their faith could light the way through the encroaching gloom. Together, Aldrich and Matthias descended into the cold, damp shadows of the crypt, ready to face the echoes of betrayal that had haunted their land for centuries. The entrance to the crypt was hidden beneath the shattered altar of the abbey's chapel. Thick vines and rubble concealed the ancient stone door, its surface etched with faint glowing runes. Aldrich traced the symbols with reverence, whispering a prayer as Matthias pushed the door open. A cold breath of air escaped, carrying the scent of damp earth and forgotten sorrow. The narrow passageway beyond was lined with torches, long extinguished, but remnants of their holders' faith. Stepping inside, the walls seemed to close in, the air thickening with the weight of centuries. As they moved deeper, whispers echoed faintly, like voices trapped between this world and the next. Aldrich gripped his crucifix tightly, his voice steady as he chanted ancient prayers. Matthias held a lantern, its flickering light casting grotesque shadows that danced along the walls. At the passage's end, they found a heavy stone sarcophagus, cracked and worn. The name Amun was carved into the lid, surrounded by symbols of protection and warning. Aldrich placed his hand on the cold stone, feeling the residual energy, dark and restless. Suddenly, the ground trembled. The shadows around them coalesced into a swirling mass of black smoke and glowing eyes. The spirit of Amun rose, twisted by centuries of torment and rage, his voice a haunting echo. "You dare disturb my rest." Aldrich stepped forward, unwavering. "I come not to harm, but to end the curse you unleashed. Release your soul, Amun, and find peace." The specter snarled, lashing out with tendrils of darkness. Matthias reacted quickly, throwing a vial of holy water that hissed upon contact. The spirit recoiled, shrieking in fury. A fierce battle erupted in the crypt's confines. Aldrich's prayers formed a shield of light, pushing back the encroaching darkness. The fight was not just physical, but spiritual, an agonizing struggle for redemption and release. As the first light of dawn seeped into the crypt, the shadowy form of Amun began to dissolve, his anguished cries fading into silence. With a final, whispered plea for forgiveness, his spirit was freed. Exhausted but victorious, Aldrich and Matthias emerged from the crypt. The curse had been broken, but the scars left on the land and the souls of the living would take time to heal. The dawn had barely broken when Aldrich and Matthias arrived at the edge of the Blackwood Forest. The locals spoke of this place in hushed tones, an ancient woodland where shadows moved with a will of their own, and the wind carried whispers not meant for mortal ears. Aldrich tightened his cloak against the morning chill. The trees here were twisted and gnarled, their branches clawing at the gray sky like skeletal fingers. The forest floor was thick with moss and fallen leaves, muffling their footsteps as they ventured inward. "We must find the source of the darkness that has seeped into these woods," Aldrich said, his voice steady but burdened with the weight of unspoken fears. Matthias nodded, holding his lantern aloft. "The villagers say the forest is cursed, haunted by spirits that prey on the lost." As they moved deeper, the air grew colder and the whispers grew louder. At first it was just the rustling of leaves, but soon it became clear. Voices calling out in desperate pleas, sorrowful cries, and ominous warnings. Suddenly, a figure appeared among the trees. A young woman dressed in tattered robes, her eyes glowing with an unnatural light. She reached out a trembling hand and spoke in a voice that was both haunting and fragile. "Help me, trapped between worlds. They won't let me go." Aldrich stepped forward cautiously. "Who are you, and what binds you here?" "My name is Isolde," she whispered. "I was accused of witchcraft and burned at the stake decades ago. My soul cannot rest. The forest keeps me prisoner." Matthias exchanged a wary glance with Aldrich. "We must break the curse that holds her and the forest in darkness." Together they began a ritual at the heart of the woods. Aldrich's prayers intertwined with Matthias's incantations, weaving a protective circle around them. The whispers swelled into a deafening chorus as shadows writhed and twisted. Isolde's form flickered like a candle in the wind, her glow intensifying. "Thank you. I feel the chains breaking." With a final cry, the darkness shattered, and the forest seemed to breathe anew. Light pierced through the canopy, revealing the beauty hidden beneath the twisted branches. As the first true rays of sunlight touched the earth, Isolde's spirit ascended, freed at last from centuries of torment. Aldrich and Matthias emerged from Blackwood Forest, weary but hopeful, another victory in their battle against the shadows that plagued their land. The sun was setting behind the jagged peaks of the Carpathian Mountains as Aldrich and Matthias approached the ruins of Castle Ravenshade. The ancient fortress, once a bastion of power, now stood as a crumbling monument swallowed by ivy and shadow. Its dark silhouette loomed against the blood-red sky like a beast waiting to pounce. Locals warned them of the castle's sinister history. Centuries ago, it was the seat of Count Victor von Haller, a nobleman rumored to have made a pact with demonic forces to secure his dominion. Whispers told of screams echoing through its halls, and shadows that moved with a life of their own. Aldrich felt a chill crawl down his spine as they crossed the threshold. The heavy iron gate creaked open, revealing a vast courtyard littered with broken stone and twisted metal. The air was thick with the scent of decay and something far more malevolent. "We seek to cleanse this place of its darkness," Aldrich announced, clutching his crucifix tightly. Matthias lit a row of candles, their flickering flames casting eerie shadows on the crumbling walls. As night deepened, the castle seemed to come alive. Faint footsteps echoed from distant chambers, and ghostly whispers drifted through the corridors. Aldrich's heart pounded as he led the way deeper into the fortress, determined to confront whatever evil lurked within. In the great hall, a figure materialized, a spectral form clad in tattered armor, eyes glowing with an unholy. It was the restless spirit of Count von Haller, bound to the castle by his dark deeds. "You dare defile my domain?" the apparition hissed, raising a ghostly sword. Aldrich stepped forward, reciting prayers of exorcism, his voice unwavering despite the fear clawing at his chest. The battle was both physical and spiritual. Shadows writhed and struck, but Aldrich's faith forged a shield of light. With Matthias's aid, they forced the specter back, breaking the curse that had chained the Count for centuries. As dawn broke, the castle fell silent, bathed in a golden light that washed away the gloom. Aldrich and Matthias stood victorious but weary, knowing that evil still lingered in other forgotten corners of the world, waiting for those brave enough to face it. The aftermath of their victory at Castle Ravenshade left Aldrich and Matthias weary but resolute. Yet the darkness they fought was only a fragment of a greater evil stirring in the heart of the Carpathian region. Word had reached them of a cursed forest nearby, the Whispering Woods, where travelers vanished without a trace, and the trees themselves seemed to murmur secrets in the dead of night. As they entered the dense woodland, an unnatural silence enveloped them. The usual symphony of birdsong and rustling leaves was replaced by an eerie stillness, broken only by faint whispers that seemed to glide on the cold wind. Aldrich's hand never left his crucifix, and Matthias clutched a bundle of blessed herbs, ready for whatever spiritual battle awaited. The deeper they ventured, the more the woods seemed alive with sinister intent. Shadows flickered between gnarled branches, and ghostly figures danced just beyond the edge of sight. Their lanterns barely pierced the thick fog that curled around ancient trunks like spectral serpents. Suddenly a child's laughter echoed, a sound both innocent and chilling. They followed the laughter to a clearing, where a small pale girl stood, her eyes void of life yet fixed upon them with unsettling intensity. Aldrich stepped forward cautiously. "Child, why do you linger here?" he asked softly. The girl's voice was a haunting melody. "I am lost, trapped by the forest's curse. The Shadow King holds me, along with many others." Before they could respond, the ground trembled as dark figures emerged, twisted creatures born from nightmare, guardians of the Shadow King's domain. Aldrich and Matthias prepared for combat, their faith and courage their only weapons. The battle was fierce. Each swing of Aldrich's crucifix sent bursts of radiant light, burning the grotesque beasts. Matthias chanted prayers, the blessed herbs releasing fragrant smoke that weakened the shadows. Yet the forest itself fought against them, roots trying to entangle their feet, branches clawing like spectral hands. In the heart of the woods they found the Shadow King, a towering figure cloaked in shadows, his eyes glowing with malevolence. He wielded a staff carved from blackened bone, the source of the forest's dark magic. Aldrich faced him bravely. "Your reign ends tonight, demon." A fierce duel of light and darkness erupted. Aldrich's prayers clashed against the Shadow King's curses. The forest shook as power surged between them. Finally, with a final invocation, Aldrich shattered the staff, breaking the curse. The whispering woods sighed, the oppressive gloom lifting. The pale girl smiled faintly before fading into the morning light. The lost souls were freed. Though exhausted, Aldrich and Matthias knew their journey was far from over. The shadows of history and hell still stretched across Europe, and the fight to banish them would demand all their strength. After their harrowing ordeal in the Whispering Woods, Father Aldrich and Matthias found themselves drawn toward a new mystery, the ancient crypt of lost souls, buried deep beneath the ruins of a forgotten monastery. The crypt was rumored to be a prison for restless spirits, tormented by sins long buried in history, trapped between worlds by a dark curse. The monastery itself had been destroyed centuries ago during the Bloody Crusades, leaving behind only crumbled stones and whispered legends. Villagers nearby spoke in hushed tones about the eerie blue flames flickering at night above the crypt's entrance, and the mournful chanting that seemed to echo from below. Aldrich approached the heavy iron door, its surface cold and damp. He traced the faded carvings of crosses and ancient runes, murmuring prayers of protection. Matthias readied a vial of holy water and a blessed dagger, knowing that what lay within could be more than mere spirits. It could be the source of a dark force that threatened the region. As they descended into the crypt's depths, the air grew thick and suffocating. The walls, etched with the faces of those long dead, seemed to watch their every move. Flickering torchlight cast grotesque shadows that danced mockingly. Suddenly, a chorus of ghostly voices filled the chamber, recounting tales of betrayal, war, and unrelenting suffering. The souls trapped here were caught in eternal torment, their cries feeding the dark power that bound them. Aldrich stepped forward, raising his crucifix high. "In the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit, I command you, be released." The crypt trembled as shadows coalesced into a massive wraith, the embodiment of anguish and wrath. It surged forward, its chilling touch threatening to freeze their very souls. Matthias threw the vial of holy water, which shattered upon the wraith's form, causing it to shriek and recoil. Aldrich recited an ancient exorcism rite, his voice steady despite the encroaching darkness. The battle waged on, light clashing with shadow, prayers with curses. Slowly, the wraith weakened, its cries turning to whispers. Finally, with a final invocation, the spirit was freed, ascending in a burst of radiant light. The crypt's oppressive weight lifted. The faces on the walls softened. Their torment ended at last. Aldrich and Matthias emerged into the cold dawn. The monastery ruins bathed in soft light. They knew their fight was far from over. Dark forces lingered still, woven into the fabric of history and human suffering. But each victory, no matter how small, was a beacon of hope, a promise that even in the darkest times light could prevail. After escaping the haunting crypt, Father Aldrich and Matthias traveled toward a remote village hidden in the mountains, where an abandoned chapel was said to hold answers to the dark forces troubling the region. The villagers spoke of strange occurrences, lights flickering in the night, prayers whispered by unseen voices, and the lingering scent of incense long since burned out. The chapel, once a place of refuge during the brutal wars of the Middle Ages, had fallen into ruin after the last priest disappeared mysteriously decades ago. Its stained glass windows were shattered, and the wooden pews rotted with time, but the altar remained oddly intact, as if protected by an unseen hand. Upon entering, Aldrich felt an oppressive presence weighing down on his spirit. The air was thick with a coldness that seeped into his bones. Matthias carried a lantern, its flickering light revealing faded frescoes depicting angels battling demonic figures. As Aldrich knelt before the altar, he noticed a hidden compartment beneath it. Inside lay a dusty tome bound in cracked leather. The book's pages were yellowed with age, but the ink still held strange symbols and ancient prayers. Matthias warned, this might be a grimoire, a book of dark magic disguised as holy scripture. Ignoring the warning, Aldrich opened the tome and began reading aloud. The words stirred the air, and suddenly shadows gathered in the corners of the chapel, whispering secrets in tongues forgotten by time. The ground trembled as a figure materialized before them, a fallen angel, trapped between heaven and hell, condemned for rebellion yet yearning for redemption. Its eyes burned with sorrow and fury. "We seek to end this torment," Aldrich declared, clutching his crucifix tightly. "No soul shall be lost to darkness while we stand." The fallen angel spoke of a curse tied to the chapel itself, an ancient betrayal that fractured the very foundations of faith in this land. To break it, Aldrich would have to confront not only the evil within, but the doubts and fears festering in his own heart. As the night deepened, the battle between light and shadow raged within the forgotten chapel, a fight not only for salvation, but for the very soul of the world. The dawn broke cold and gray as Father Aldrich sat in the ruins of the forgotten chapel, the fallen angel's words still echoing in his mind. The curse that haunted this land was not merely the work of demons or restless spirits. It was born from betrayal, human treachery so profound that even heaven seemed to recoil. Aldrich's thoughts drifted back to the chronicles he had studied in the ancient monastery library, tales of a noble family that once ruled this region with divine right. The House of Malrec had been entrusted with guarding a sacred relic, a symbol of faith and power. But greed and envy had poisoned their hearts. The youngest son, Sir Gideon, had sold his soul to a dark force in exchange for power, dooming his bloodline and the land itself. The relic vanished, and with it, the blessing that protected the people. Wars ravaged the countryside, plagues swept through villages, and shadows grew stronger, feeding on despair. The chapel had once been a sanctuary, a beacon of hope amid the chaos. Now, it was a prison for restless souls and a gateway for evil. Matthias helped Aldrich to his feet, the old man's eyes reflecting both fear and determination. "We must find the relic," he said. "Only by reclaiming it can the curse be broken." Their journey led them through dense forests and forgotten paths, following clues hidden in cryptic manuscripts and whispered legends. Each step seemed to draw them deeper into a labyrinth of secrets, where allies were scarce and enemies often wore familiar faces. As they neared the ruins of Castle Malrec, the wind howled like the cries of the betrayed. The castle, once magnificent, now stood as a shattered skeleton against the gray sky. Ivy strangled its towers, and broken banners fluttered like ghosts in the cold breeze. Inside, Aldrich felt the weight of history pressing down on him. The air was thick with sorrow and rage, and the shadows seemed to watch, waiting for the moment to strike. He clutched his crucifix, whispering prayers for protection. In the great hall, among the rubble, lay an ancient chest bound in iron. The lock was rusted but still sealed tight. With trembling hands, Aldrich found the key hidden beneath a fallen stone altar and opened the chest. Inside, wrapped in faded velvet, was the relic, a small, ornate chalice adorned with symbols of light and sacrifice. The moment Aldrich touched it, a surge of warmth spread through him, pushing back the cold darkness. But as the chalice was lifted, a terrible howl shattered the silence. From the shadows emerged a monstrous figure, a twisted manifestation of Sir Gideon's cursed soul, bent on destruction and chaos. The battle that followed was fierce and desperate. Aldrich's faith was his shield, his prayers, his sword. Matthias stood by his side, wielding an ancient staff carved with holy runes. The clash of light and darkness echoed through the ruined halls, a final struggle to restore what was lost. When the dust settled, the cursed spirit was banished, and the chapel's shadows began to recede. Yet Aldrich knew this victory was but a moment in an ongoing war. The echoes of betrayal still whispered, and the darkness would rise again. But for now, the relic was safe, and with it, a glimmer of hope for the land scarred by centuries of pain. The first rays of sunlight struggled to penetrate the dense fog clinging to the valley as Father Aldrich and Matthias made their way from the ruins of Castle Malrek back to the chapel. The relic was safe for now, yet a lingering unease weighed heavily upon Aldrich's heart. The darkness they had confronted was but a fragment of a greater evil that still loomed over the land. As they crossed the ancient stone bridge spanning the roaring river, Aldrich's thoughts returned to the villagers they had met, people whose lives had been shattered by years of war, plague, and fear. Their eyes, hollow and haunted, told stories that no words could capture. The curse was not merely a spiritual torment, but a wound inflicted upon the very soul of the region. Upon reaching the chapel, Aldrich noticed the air had changed. The familiar scent of burning candles and old wood was replaced by a chilling silence, broken only by the faint rustling of wind through cracked windows. The shadows seemed to dance unnaturally along the walls, flickering like living things. Inside, the walls bore fresh scratches, deep gouges that had not been there before. Matthias knelt by the altar, examining the marks with a troubled expression. "Something has followed us here," he murmured. "The curse is not finished." Aldrich's grip tightened on his crucifix. He walked slowly through the chapel, chanting ancient prayers learned from dusty tomes. The room grew colder, and an oppressive presence filled the air. Suddenly, the candle flame sputtered and died, plunging them into darkness. The temperature dropped sharply, and an unearthly whisper filled the space around them. Aldrich's voice faltered for a moment, but then he steadied himself, reciting the rites of exorcism. From the darkness emerged a figure, ethereal and malevolent, its eyes glowing with a fiery hatred. It was the spirit of a betrayed priest, twisted by centuries of pain and rage, condemned to wander the chapel in eternal torment. The specter lunged forward, its voice a cacophony of sorrow and fury. Aldrich raised the relic chalice, its light piercing through the shadow. The spirit shrieked, recoiling from the holy symbol, but it was relentless, circling and striking again. Matthias joined the prayers, his staff illuminating the chapel with runes of power. Together they formed a barrier of faith and light, pushing the darkness back. As dawn finally broke through the chapel's stained glass, the spirit let out a final wail and vanished. leaving only silence behind. Exhausted but resolute, Aldrich understood that this battle was far from over. The chapel, once a place of peace, was now a battleground for forces beyond mortal comprehension. The relic was a beacon, but also a target. He looked to Matthias, who nodded grimly. "We must prepare. The shadows will come again, and next time they will be stronger." Outside, the valley seemed to hold its breath, waiting for the next chapter in the war between light and darkness. The heavy oak doors of the chapel creaked open, and Father Aldrich stepped into the cold morning air. The mist still clung stubbornly to the valley, swirling like restless spirits refusing to leave. Matthias was already by the riverbank, his figure barely visible through the fog, as he prepared the horses for their journey. The events of the night haunted Aldrich's mind. The encounter with the priest's vengeful spirit had shaken him deeply, a reminder that the forces they faced were far beyond ordinary evil. The centuries-old curse was intertwined with history, faith, and betrayal in ways that would test the limits of his resolve. As they rode away from the chapel, the castle ruins disappeared into the distance, swallowed by the creeping fog. Their destination was an ancient monastery nestled deep in the forest, a place whispered about in local legends, said to hold secrets that might help them unravel the darkness spreading across the land. The road was rough and narrow, winding through twisted trees whose branches clawed at the sky like skeletal hands. Along the way, they passed abandoned villages, their empty houses hollowed out by time and fear. Each step forward seemed to carry the weight of forgotten souls. Upon arrival, the monastery stood silent and foreboding. Its stone walls were weathered by centuries, covered in creeping ivy and moss. The once grand bell tower was shattered, a testament to the ravages of war and neglect. Yet inside, a faint glow emanated from the crypt beneath the altar. Inside the dim corridors, Father Aldrich's footsteps echoed off cold stone. The air was thick with incense and the lingering presence of prayers long forgotten. They descended into the crypt, where ancient manuscripts and relics lay undisturbed. At the center of the crypt stood an altar carved with symbols both holy and arcane. Aldrich traced his fingers over the engravings, feeling a chill run down his spine. The inscriptions told of a sacred pact made centuries ago, a pact between the monks and a powerful entity intended to protect the region from darkness, but at a terrible cost. Matthias carefully opened a leather-bound tome, revealing passages in Latin that spoke of rituals to contain evil spirits and the price of failure. Aldrich realized that the curse was not merely a punishment, but a consequence of broken promises and forgotten duties. Suddenly, a low rumble vibrated through the crypt, dust falling from the vaulted ceiling. The air grew heavy, and shadows lengthened as if the darkness itself had awakened. Aldrich gripped his cross tightly, chanting prayers as the room seemed to close in around them. The echoes of the forgotten monks whispered warnings through the stone walls, urging vigilance against the coming storm. Outside, the forest seemed alive with unseen eyes, watching, waiting. The war between light and shadow was far from over, and Aldrich knew that to protect the souls of the valley, he would need to confront the past, no matter how dark or painful. The dawn was reluctant to break through the dense canopy of the ancient forest as Father Aldrich and Matthias set out from the monastery. The air was thick with silence, save for the crunch of hooves on fallen leaves and the occasional distant call of a raven. Each step deeper into the woods felt like a descent into a forgotten world, where time itself seemed to stand still. Aldrich's mind raced with the revelations uncovered in the crypt, the sacred pact, the betrayal of the monks, the restless spirits trapped between worlds. All these pieces painted a grim picture of the curse that plagued the valley. The evil was not just external, it was woven into the very fabric of the land and its history. Their destination was a small village rumored to have once been the site of a brutal witch trial during the darkest days of the Inquisition. The villagers had long abandoned the place, fleeing from the horrors that seemed to seep from the soil itself. Yet the evil lingered, manifesting in whispers, shadows, and unexplainable disappearances. As they approached the village's ruins, the air grew colder, the atmosphere heavier. Broken windows and crumbled walls told stories of fear and despair. Among the ruins, Aldrich spotted a faint light flickering behind what remained of a chapel's altar. With caution, they made their way inside. There, amidst the debris, lay an ancient relic, a twisted crucifix, blackened by age and dark rituals. Aldrich reached out, his fingers trembling, sensing the residual power still clinging to the object. This was no ordinary relic. It was a conduit, a source through which the darkness fed and spread. Suddenly, a chilling wind swept through the chapel, extinguishing their lanterns and plunging them into darkness. The oppressive silence shattered with the distant sound of chanting, echoing through the night like a spectral choir. "Prepare yourself, Matthias," Aldrich whispered, gripping his cross tighter. "We are not alone." From the shadows emerged figures cloaked in tattered robes, their faces hidden, but their intent unmistakable. The cult that once thrived here had not vanished. They had only grown more sinister, feeding on the valley's curse. The battle that ensued was fierce and harrowing. Aldrich's prayers in the holy water clashed against the dark forces, illuminating the chapel in flashes of light and shadow. But as dawn's first light touched the ruins, the cultists vanished, leaving behind only the echo of their malevolence. Breathing heavily, Aldrich realized that this was only the beginning. To break the curse, he would have to confront not only the dark forces outside, but the shadows of the past lurking within every stone, every whisper of the valley. The sun had barely risen when Father Aldrich and Matthias emerged from the ruins of the cursed village. The chill in the air was no less biting, and the weight of what they had encountered settled heavily upon their shoulders. The battle with the cultists had left more questions than answers. Who were they really serving? And what force animated their dark rituals? Back at the monastery, Aldrich pored over the ancient manuscripts he had recovered. His eyes traced the faded ink of cryptic symbols and long-forgotten languages. Among the texts, one passage caught his attention, an old prophecy foretelling the return of a darkness older than mankind itself. It spoke of a shadow lord, bound beneath the earth, whose awakening would plunge the world into eternal night. The prophecy mentioned a key, a relic lost to time, hidden deep within the catacombs beneath the very castle where Aldrich had first been sent on his mission. The same castle that housed the restless spirits of fallen knights and betrayed kings. Determined, Aldrich and Matthias set out once more, their path leading through winding mountain passes blanketed in mist. The castle loomed ahead, its towers piercing the gray sky like jagged teeth. Inside its cold stone walls, they would confront the heart of the curse. The catacombs beneath the castle were a labyrinth of darkness, filled with the echoes of centuries past. As they ventured deeper, strange symbols glowed faintly on the walls, and an oppressive presence pressed upon their souls. Suddenly a voice whispered through the shadows, a voice not of this world, promising power in exchange for allegiance. Aldrich resisted, clutching his cross and invoking the names of saints. The air thickened, shadows coalesced into shapes, and the battle for their very souls began. With every step, Aldrich felt the weight of history, of betrayal, bloodshed, and unspoken pacts that bound this place. He realized the curse was not simply a tale of evil spirits, but a legacy of human greed and sin, twisted by dark forces beyond comprehension. As they reached the innermost chamber, the air grew frigid. There, Resting on an ancient pedestal lay the relic, a blackened chalice etched with runes of power. Aldrich knew that to end the nightmare, he must destroy it, even if it meant confronting the Shadow Lord itself. The fate of the valley, and perhaps all of Europe, hung in the balance as Father Aldrich prepared for the final confrontation. The air was thick with dread as Father Aldrich and Matthias descended into the ancient chamber beneath the castle. Flickering torchlight cast dancing shadows on the cold stone walls, and every step echoed like a funeral march. The relic, the blackened chalice, rested ominously on the pedestal, pulsing faintly with a dark, unnatural energy. Aldrich's heart pounded fiercely, but he steadied his hands, gripping the crucifix tightly. "This ends tonight," he whispered, invoking a prayer for strength and courage. Suddenly the ground trembled, and from the shadows emerged a figure cloaked in darkness, a towering apparition with eyes burning like embers. The Shadow Lord had awakened. The chamber filled with an oppressive silence, broken only by the sinister hiss of the entity's voice. "You cannot stop what has been set in motion, priest. I am eternal." Aldrich stepped forward, the cross raised high. "You are a lie, a corruption of God's creation. You will not claim this world." The battle began. Shadow and light collided as Aldrich recited ancient exorcisms, his voice echoing through the catacombs. The dark figure lashed out with tendrils of shadow trying to engulf him, but the power of faith shielded the priest. Matthias, though terrified, held the torch steady, illuminating the chamber, weakening the darkness. Aldrich focused all his strength on the chalice, chanting the final rites. With a blinding flash, the chalice shattered, releasing a wave of brilliant light. The Shadow Lord screamed, his form dissolving into smoke and ash. The curse that had plagued the valley for centuries was broken. Exhausted but victorious, Aldrich and Matthias emerged from the depths. The sun now shone brightly over the valley, birdsong replacing the silence of dread. Father Aldrich knew their battle was not just against evil spirits, but against the darkness within mankind, the greed, betrayal, and hatred that had given rise to such horrors. The castle, once a prison of shadows, would become a beacon of hope. As they walked away from the ruins, Aldrich felt a quiet resolve. The world was vast and darkness would always lurk, but with faith, courage, and truth, it could be faced and overcome. The end of this chapter was only the beginning of another. As the shadows finally recede and the last echoes of evil fade into the forgotten corners of history, Father Aldrich stands alone, scarred, changed, but unbroken. His journey through darkness has tested the limits of faith and the resilience of the human spirit. Though the war against the darkness is never truly over, hope endures in the light he has rekindled. The castle may crumble, and time may bury its secrets, but the story of courage, sacrifice, and the eternal battle between good and evil will live on. Thank you for walking this shadowed path with Father Aldrich. May your own light never fade, even in the darkest nights.